What's going on, everyone? I'm Brandon Miranda, a Grammy-nominated engineer and music producer, and I'm here to bring clarity and ease to everyone's music mastery and career. A common question I've been seeing online is, how do I make my vocals sit better against an instrumental? And so for today, I have 4 so simple tricks. You might find yourself a little bit frustrated by the time you get to the end of this video. But I assure you, if you learn to stick to just these basic principles, your mixing mastery will be so much easier for your future projects. So for this video, expect to find some basic EQ and dynamics control to make your vocals sit better. And on top of that, I'll go over some advanced tools using the Trackspacer and CLA vocals to make your vocals sound silky and smooth within the mix down. We don't have any time to waste, so let's get right to it. Alright guys, so I got my mixing hat on, and let's go ahead and get started with this. Okay, perfect. So even right now, there's still some moments when the vocal's poking through, and truthfully, it can very much be blended a lot better into the mix down. But what I'm going to do is help everyone out here and turn off basically all of my processing and start this vocal basically from scratch. And let's go ahead and now give a listen to this vocal without any EQ and without any compression. So we can hear that the vocal is really struggling to feel polished and balanced within the mix down. The first thing I always start with is EQ in my vocal chain. So I'll start off showing you with my Pro Q here. These are my favorite notches to pull out from a vocal. If you understand these 4 general bands, then you will always have a terrific starting point for cutting out the frequencies that make a vocal sit on top of a track in an inappropriate way. First and foremost, anything between 2 to 3K is where we have a lot of harshness in a vocal, and removing those, about 2 to 3 decibels of it, will make a vocal feel smoother. Now, I don't particularly like to DS, so I will usually also EQ anything about between 5 to 7K, and that really smoothens out any harsh S's in the vocal. Then, of course, I like to remove the low end. I don't do this on every single vocal because sometimes it's not necessary, but in a situation like this, when the room was a very wide and open room and there's a lot of reflections, I found it totally necessary to pull out these sub-harmonic frequencies. Finally, the most important one for making a vocal really sit nicely in a mix is this 300 to 550 hertz range. That's that boxiness that we hear from our chest and from being in an untreated room. So what I love to do, depending on the range of the vocalist, if it's someone with a deeper voice, you'll actually target somewhere around 250. If it's a female vocal or a male alto vocal, you'll usually be able to target about 500. I always do a very wide Q, and I'll cut out almost 5 decibels of gain. And let's go ahead and just hear how the vocal sits currently before I apply this 530 hertz cut. Okay, and then now let's go ahead and turn this on and just listen how much smoother it sits within the balance of the song. The vocal almost feels quieter and sits better in the mix and much smoother, even dynamically too, which now leads me to the next step of controlling vocals, and that's by using basic compression settings. Now, a lot of times growing mixing engineers very much struggle when it comes to applying compression, and I totally understand that. There is so many different outputs and textures that you can get with compression. When you're trying to master compression, look at it from this very, very simple mindset. You listen to an uncompressed vocal, you'll usually find that some lyrics are quieter than others, and those quieter lyrics get lost in all the instruments of the mix, and then loud vocals tend to start to sit on top of the mix in an unpleasing way. If you can start by just listening for those kinds of nuances within a vocal, then you're well on your way to understanding the foundations of how to properly apply compression. Let's go ahead and listen to a more dynamic section of the vocal, and I'll point out to you some moments when the lyrics get lost and moments when the lyrics are too loud. Check it out. Amazing. So let me point this out to you real quick. we'll hear how this moments right here very much gets lost in the mix down. Then her my, and you can actually visually see how much louder these vocals are right here. This my pokes out so much that it actually starts to feel like the vocal is sitting on top of the instrumental, like a karaoke track. Now with that in mind, let's go ahead and give it a listen one more time. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of give myself a heart attack here, but reset my compression settings. When I'm just getting the basics, I will usually start off with a very moderate 4:1 ratio, and then I'll only lean upon my threshold to kind of listen for how I'm controlling that vocal. And my goal is to make the level differences between the quiet lyrics and the louder lyrics much smaller. Perfect. I'm super happy with that because I heard the mime. It was still kind of poking through a little bit more, but not sitting too much on top of the instrumental. And then what I really was listening for was having that moments line right here start to feel like it's being brought out in the mix a whole lot better. Now, before I can do an accurate comparison and contrast, I will have to adjust my makeup gain because if you notice, lowering the threshold of the compression started to actually make the vocals sit quieter in the mix. This is the exact reason we have makeup gain, because if I bypass this and the vocal is louder, my psychology is going to drift into thinking that louder equals better. I'm guessing I need probably about 2.5 dB. If my makeup gain is properly dialed in and I can turn off and turn on this plugin without any difference in gain, then I'll be able to accurately compare, does the uncompressed vocal sound better than the compressed vocal or vice versa. So let's make sure we got everything set in the proper way. And then let's turn it on. Perfect. So now I can hear exactly apples to apples. How am I affecting this vocal? And ask myself that question. Am I making it sound better with the compression or am I making it sound worse? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and listen. Off. And on. Absolutely love it. The vocal is now sitting so much better in the mix down, and I'm not losing lyrics, and I'm not having lyrics come out too much within the mix. So those are two very simple principles for making your vocal sit properly in the mix. And if you just apply those two things well and diligently, you should no longer have too much struggle with getting your vocals to sit where you want them to sit. But of course, there's so many more tools. So let's now look at reverb and using the Trackspacer. Okay, so this next trick is not just super effective for making lead vocals sit within a mix, but it's also very helpful when being applied to group and layered vocals. What I'm actually going to do is show you how I use the CLA vocal plugin on my group vocals. And in fact, I'm going to leave off all of my channel plugins that I typically use when I'm mixing, and I can show you how I can actually make everything sit the way I want it to sit with just this plugin. First and foremost, to be able to turn everything off, which is a great starting point, you can actually click the names of these. So now let's reset, and then let's also turn on and bring back in our backing vocals. So now we're going to hear everything layered together, and pay attention to when I add those background vocals, that 500 hertz frequency starts to build up because frequency is additive. And so now, even though we carved out some nice space in our lead vocal, the introduction of our backgrounds is going to make up that, like I said, karaoke frequency. Check it out. And now the vocals, again, are going to be kind of sitting on top of the instrumental. Awesome. Okay, cool. So now we hear these backgrounds are sticking out a little bit too much and everything. Of course, I can EQ them a little bit more, but let's go ahead and just play with some room tone and some reverb to get this vocal to sit in. So my favorite settings on the CLA is using this tight reverb. Now, I always recommend in your mix down to have at least 2 reverbs. One that's your long effect one, the one that's adding drama to a mix down, right? That in itself will help a vocal sit, but to really, really make that instrumental and vocal blend together, you'll really want to lean on your tight reverbs. That's reverb shorter than 0.8 seconds. So as I always start with it, very, very low. I'll dial it too loud, and then I'll start to find a setting where I feel the vocal sitting better. I'm actually not so interested in hearing the reverb per se, but what I'm interested is in feeling like that vocal and the instrumental is really meshing well together. So let's go ahead and dial this in. So here's it off. And now here's it on. Beautiful. So much better and tucked in. The next thing I like to do with the CLA is I'll actually add the stereo effect. And truly any kind of stereo width plugin is playing with, you may have heard as the Haas effect, where I'm adding such a slight micro delay that the vocal starts to feel like it's kind of flanging in a way. And so I like to play with the stereo effect over here to also help the vocal sit better in the mix. Check this out. So much better. And then finally what I'll do is I'll actually roll off a little bit from the top end. This bite targets about 2 to 7K. And I found that by darkening the vocal mildly, it'll actually tuck it in better into the mix down. And then the push, spank, and wall settings on the CLA are forms of compression and limiting. And what I like to do is I like to kind of control those loudest peaks. You'll hear the S's are kind of popping through, and the push will kind of slam down on those and will also kind of glue the vocals together, like I'm using bus compression. And so what I do is I'll push this up. It's going to make the vocal louder, so then I'll lean on my output knob to help tuck the vocal back into where we need it to be. Here we go. And here is before. And here is after. Sounds amazing. Okay, perfect. Now, for my final and one of my favorite tricks, using Trackspacer. Now, I have a little bit of beef when it comes to Trackspacer because I've seen so many engineers use this and abuse it, where they just throw it onto a mixdown and all it's doing is ducking the entire instrumental against the vocal, and it makes for a very hollowed out, sleepy mix. But if you can get under the hood of Trackspacer and play with some of the more hidden features of it, then it can become a very powerful tool for getting a solid mix down. The way I like to set up Trackspacer is I'll put it, of course, starting on the instrumental. If you haven't already used this plugin, what you can do is you can have a scent coming out from your vocals, and I usually use the lead vocals, and that's the main instrument that I want to pop through. And I'll send it all the way to 0, so the entire thing is getting fed. I will actually, just for my own purposes, rename that send into my sidechain. And then if I go through the key inputs over here, I can scroll down through my buses and find that sidechain output. I'll close this, and if I just have it all the way at 100% wet, you'll hear how the vocal is now completely ducking out the instrumental. Super cool. Now, the problem is it is so easy to overdo it with this plugin. So the way I manage things so my instrumental still feels natural, my vocal pops out in a great way, is I will actually change this from left to right, meaning stereo, into mid-side. When I take this little pan knob now, the more I turn it to the left, the more I'm only ducking out the frequencies in the mid spectrum. That means I'm not touching the sides of the instruments, only the mid. And if I inverse this and I turn it all the way to the right hand side, then I am ducking out the sides of the instrumental and not the mids. Let's check out how that sounds. Super cool. So here's how I do it. Because you don't want to notch out every single frequency between a vocal and an instrumental, because actually there are particular frequencies when they layer with each other, they benefit each other. They support one another. And that is especially true with about 100 to 200 hertz between the kick and the bass in a vocal, and around 2K and 5K of a vocal in an instrumental. These frequencies actually are supposed to blend well. Contrary to popular opinion, it's okay to allow certain frequencies to layer over one another and build on one another. It's just all about choosing the right frequencies. So the way I dial in this plugin is I'll leave the pan usually around right there at 9 o'clock. We'll come back here to our view mode of the EQ, leave this all the way at 100% just to exaggerate it for my own ears. Then I'll start to dial in the frequencies that I want the vocal to duck. Right there is where I start to hear the vocal and the instruments, the bass line, really blend in a nice way. Now let's do the opposite side. Moments will have my mind, hold my life, there is moments. When it comes to my high cut, what I'm listening for is that space where the snap of the snare and the bite of the vocal really start to mesh well and support each other. Check this out. By your side, let's have moments. Perfect. And then now my objective is when I dial back this ratio, I want it to be to a point where the vocal starts to push through and I'm feeling this effect more than I'm really hearing it. So we'll go back and forth between 0 to 100 and then find that nice in-between point where everything starts to work and blend well together. Moments will have my mind, hold my life, there is moments by your side. Amazing. So one more time without the plugin. Moments will have my mind, hold my, and then with the plugin on. Moments will have my mind, hold my life, there is moments. Okay, so there you have it. 4 very simple tricks to be able to make your vocals sit efficiently and effectively within the context of your mixdown. We covered 2 foundational tools and we covered 2 advanced tools. Both, when you dial these things in properly with your record, should result in excellent sounding mixes. I hope this video gave some people solutions, and if it did so, please give me a follow, like this video, and comment this video with any questions and or more topics that you would love for me to go over. I'm always here to help bring clarity to your music making process and to help illuminate the truth that mixing does not have to be hard. I'm Brandon Miranda, and thank you so much for stopping by.